Jake Morrison walked slowly through the alien refugee camp on the distant planet called Kepler 442b. His left leg was not real anymore. The doctors had replaced it with metal and circuits after the war. Every step made a small clicking sound on the metal floor of the camp. Jake had come here to help after losing his friends and his leg in the big war against the bad aliens called the Vorthons. The camp was full of strange beings from many different worlds. They all looked scared and sad. Some had fur, some had scales, and some looked like walking crystals. All of them had lost their homes when the Vorthons came to destroy their planets. Jake felt sorry for them because he knew what it was like to lose everything. The camp had many long buildings where the refugees lived. There were also places to get food and medical help. Human doctors and alien healers worked together to take care of everyone. But even with all this help, the camp felt like a sad place. Too many beings had lost their families and friends. Jake was walking near the edge of the camp when he saw something that made him stop. In a corner far from everyone else sat the biggest dog-like creature he had ever seen. The animal was as tall as a small building and covered in black fur that looked like the night sky. Its eyes were bright yellow like fire, and they stared at nothing with a look Jake knew too well. Other refugees walked far around the creature. Some pointed and whispered to their children to stay away. The big animal did not move or make any sound. It just sat there like a statue made of sadness. Jake found Helen Price, the woman who ran the camp. She was a kind human who worked hard to help everyone. When Jake asked about the big creature, Helen looked worried. "That is one of the Canary," she said. "His people were great fighters who protected their world for thousands of years. The Vorthons killed all of his family and friends. We found him half dead on one of their prison ships. He has been like this for 2 weeks." Helen looked tired as she talked. Running the camp was hard work, and she had to make difficult choices every day. "He will not eat or drink. He will not let anyone come near him. The other refugees are afraid of him. Some want us to send him away." Jake looked back at the Canary. The creature was still staring at nothing, but Jake could see pain in those yellow eyes. It was the same look he had seen in the mirror after the war. It was the look of someone who had survived when everyone else had died. "What was his name?" Jake asked. "We do not know," Helen said. "The Canary have names that sound like howling. Our computers cannot translate them properly. He has not spoken since we found him." Jake nodded and walked closer to the big creature. Other refugees moved away as he approached. Some called out warnings in their own languages. But Jake kept walking until he was about 20 feet from the Canary. The creature looked at him for the first time. Those yellow eyes were full of intelligence and pain. Jake could see that this was not just an animal. This was a person who happened to look like a giant dog. "Hey there, big guy," Jake said softly. He sat down on the ground, being careful with his metal leg. "I know that look. I have seen it in the mirror many times." The Canary did not move, but his ears twitched slightly. Jake pulled out a food bar from his pocket and took a small bite. Then he set the rest on the ground between them. "I lost my whole squad in the war," Jake continued. 23 good soldiers who followed me into battle. They all died, and I lived. Sometimes I wonder why I got to come home when they did not." The Canary's ears moved forward slightly. Jake could tell the creature was listening, even though he did not understand the words. "The doctors say I am lucky to be alive. They say I should be happy about my new leg and my chance to help people, but some days I just want to sit in a corner like you are doing now." Jake stayed there for 2 hours just talking about his friends and his home and his pain. The Canary never moved, but Jake could feel him listening. When the sun started to set, Jake stood up slowly. "I will come back tomorrow," he said. "Maybe you will want to share some food then." The next day, Jake returned with more food. This time he brought a small chair so he could sit more comfortably. The Canary was in the same place, still not moving. But when Jake sat down, the creature's head turned slightly toward him. Jake talked about his hometown and his family. He told stories about his dog named Buddy who used to wait for him to come home from school. He talked about the war and how scared he had been. He talked about waking up in the hospital and learning that his leg was gone. "The hardest part was not the pain," Jake said. "It was knowing that I could not save my friends. I was their leader, and I failed them. For just a moment, Jake thought he heard a very quiet whimper from the canary. But when he looked up, the creature was still staring straight ahead. On the third day, Jake brought a bigger meal. He had asked the camp kitchen to give him extra food. As he sat down and started eating, he noticed the canary's nose moving slightly. The creature was smelling the food. "This is pretty good," Jake said, taking a bite. "Not as good as my mom's cooking, but better than military rations." He set half of his meal on the ground near the canary. This time something different happened. The canary looked down at the food, then back at Jake. Those yellow eyes seemed to be asking a question. "It is okay," Jake said quietly. "You have to eat something. Your friends would want you to live." Very slowly, the canary lowered his massive head toward the food. He sniffed it carefully, then took a small bite. It was the first food he had eaten since arriving at the camp. Jake smiled for the first time in weeks. "That is good, big guy. That is really good." As the alien sun set behind the mountains, Jake knew something important had happened. The giant creature that no one wanted had taken his first step back toward life. And somehow, Jake felt a little bit better too. Jake came back every day for a week. Each time, the giant canary ate a little more food. Jake talked about everything he could think of while the creature listened. Sometimes Jake talked about happy things like his childhood, or funny stories from before the war. Other times he talked about the hard things like losing his friends or learning to walk with his new leg. The canary never made any sounds, but Jake could tell he was getting better. His yellow eyes looked more alive each day. Sometimes he would tilt his head when Jake said something interesting. Once Jake thought he saw the creature's tail move just a tiny bit. Other people in the camp started to notice the changes too. Helen Price stopped by one afternoon while Jake was sharing his lunch with the canary. "This is amazing," she said quietly. "He looks so much better." "What are you doing?" Jake shrugged. "Just talking to him like he is a person. Because I think he is." "The canary are very intelligent," Helen agreed. "Their whole culture was built around loyalty and protecting others. Before the war, they were known as some of the best fighters in the galaxy, but they only fought to defend their families and friends." Jake looked at the canary with new understanding. "So he was a soldier too?" "More than that," Helen said. "From what we learned before his world was destroyed, he was one of their greatest warriors. His pack trusted him to keep them safe, and he could not save them." Jake felt his heart break a little more. He knew exactly how that felt. No wonder he looked so lost. That evening, Jake stayed later than usual. The camp was quiet, and most of the refugees were inside their shelters. The canary seemed more relaxed when there were fewer people around. "You know what the hardest part is?" Jake said, looking up at the stars. "Everyone tells you that it was not your fault. They say you did your best and that is all anyone could do, but it does not help, does it?" The canary made a very soft sound, almost like a sigh. "Yeah, I thought so," Jake continued. "Because you know that if you had been faster or smarter or stronger, maybe things would have been different. Maybe your friends would still be alive." This time the canary looked directly at Jake. For a long moment, human and alien stared at each other. Jake felt like the creature was looking right into his soul. "But sitting here feeling sorry for ourselves is not going to bring them back," Jake said. "And I think our friends would be pretty mad if they knew we were just giving up." The canary tilted his massive head to one side. Jake could swear the creature was thinking about what he had said. The next morning brought surprising news. Dr. Lisa Chen, the camp's doctor who studied alien biology, came to find Jake. She was excited about something. "Jake, you need to see this," she said, holding up a small device. "I have been monitoring the canary with my equipment. His brain activity has changed completely since you started visiting him." "What does that mean?" Jake asked. "It means he is getting better," Dr. Chen said. "When he first arrived, his brain showed signs of severe depression and trauma, but now he is showing normal patterns again. Whatever you are doing is working." Jake felt proud and worried at the same time. I'm not a doctor. I am just talking to him." "Sometimes that is the best medicine," Dr. Chen said. "But I want to try something. I have been working on a translation device that might help us understand him better. Would you be willing to try it? That afternoon, Dr. Chen brought her equipment to where Jake and the canary usually sat. The device looked like a small box, with wires and lights. She attached some of the wires to herself and held the box toward the canary. This should pick up his thoughts and translate them into words we can understand, she explained. But he has to want to communicate with us. Jake looked at the canary. What do you think, big guy? Want to try talking to us? The canary stared at the device for a long time. Then he looked at Jake and made a low rumbling sound. Suddenly, the box started making noises and words appeared on a small screen. Curious, the device said in a mechanical voice. Friend Jake brings hope machine, Dr. Chen gasped. It worked. He called you friend Jake. Jake felt tears in his eyes. Can you tell us your name? The canary made more sounds and the device translated. Birth name cannot be spoken by small-mouthed creatures. War name was Shadow of the Lost Mountain. Pack called me last standing when all others fell. Last standing, Jake repeated. That is a strong name for a strong warrior. Not strong, the device translated as the canary spoke. Failed pack, failed family, failed world. Am nothing now. Jake felt anger rise in his chest, but not at the canary. He was angry at the war and the Vorthons and all the pain that had been caused. You are not nothing. You are here. You are alive. And sometimes that takes more strength than dying. The canary was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his words made Jake's heart hurt. Friend Jake understands the weight of living when Pack is gone. Yes, Jake said simply. I do understand. Over the next few days, Jake and the canary talked more with the help of Dr. Chen's device. Jake learned that the canary's homeworld had been beautiful, with crystal mountains and silver forests. His pack had lived in harmony for generations, protecting their territory and raising their young together. The canary told Jake about the day the Vorthons came, how they had fought for 3 days without rest, how one by one his pack had fallen defending their home, how he had been captured while trying to save the last of the pups. I should have died with them, the canary said through the device. But you did not, Jake replied. And maybe there was a reason for that. What reason could there be for a pack leader who lost his pack? Jake thought about this for a while. He looked around the camp at all the different beings who had lost their homes and families. Many of them were children or elderly creatures who could not protect themselves. Maybe your pack is not gone, Jake said slowly. Maybe it just looks different now. The canary followed Jake's gaze around the camp. For the first time since Jake had known him, the creature stood up to his full height. He was enormous, but he moved with surprising grace. These creatures need protection, the canary said. Yes, they do, Jake agreed. And you are probably the best protector in the galaxy. The canary looked down at Jake with those intelligent yellow eyes. Friend Jake also protects, even with wounded body. We could protect them together, Jake suggested. The canary considered. This. Together, he repeated through the device. A new kind of pack. That night, something changed in the camp. The canary walked slowly through the shelters, and for the first time, refugees did not run away from him. Instead, they seemed to sense that he meant no harm. Children pointed at him in wonder, and their parents nodded respectfully. Jake walked beside him, proud of his friend's progress. The giant creature that no one had wanted was beginning to find his purpose again. And Jake was finding his own purpose too, in helping others heal from the wounds of war. 2 weeks passed and the canary had become a different creature. He no longer sat alone in the corner of the camp. Instead, he walked around the shelters with Jake, watching over the refugees like a gentle giant. Children who had been too scared to play now giggled as they ran between his massive paws. Elder beings found comfort sleeping near him, knowing they were safe. Dr. Chen was amazed by the changes. His entire personality is transformed, she told Jake one morning. It is like watching someone come back to life. Jake nodded as he watched the canary carefully step around a group of small alien children who were playing a game with colored stones. The huge creature was incredibly gentle, moving slowly so he would not accidentally hurt anyone. He told me yesterday that protecting these refugees gives him purpose again, Jake said. But I think he needs something more than just his old war name. Dr. Chen looked curious. What do you mean? Last Standing is a name about endings, Jake explained. About being the only one left. But he is not the last of anything anymore. He is the first of something new. That afternoon, Jake sat with the Yao Canary in their usual spot, but now other refugees often joined them. A crystal being named Zara liked to sit nearby because the canary's presence helped her feel calm. An elderly creature with blue scales called Finn enjoyed listening to Jake's stories about Earth. I have been thinking about names, Jake said, to the canary. Your war name was about the past, about loss. But what if you had a name about the future? The canary tilted his head, interested. What kind of name? Jake looked around the camp. In the past week, he had seen amazing changes. Refugees who had barely spoken were now talking to each other. Children were laughing again, even the adults seemed less afraid. I see what happens when you are around, Jake continued. People feel safer. They start to believe that maybe things can get better. You give them something they had lost. What do I give them? Jake smiled. Hope. You give them hope. The canary was very quiet for a long time. Jake could see him thinking, processing this idea. Finally, he spoke through the translation device. Hope is not a warrior's name. Maybe it is time for a new kind of warrior, Jake suggested. Someone who fights to protect hope instead of fighting to destroy enemies. The canary looked around the camp at all the beings he had come to care about. A small creature with purple fur was teaching her younglings to count using her fingers. 2 teenage aliens from different species were sharing their food and laughing together. An old being with feathers was telling stories to a group of children who hung on every word. These beings had given up, the canary said slowly. But now, they try again. They hope again. Because you showed them it was safe to hope, Jake replied. That is your gift. That evening, Jake and the canary were sitting together when Helen Price approached them. She looked worried, which was not unusual, but this seemed different. I need to tell you both something, she said, sitting down next to them. We received word from our scouts today. 4th and ships have been spotted 3 systems away. They are moving in this direction. Jake felt his stomach drop. How long do we have? Maybe 2 weeks, possibly less, Helen said. We are preparing to evacuate everyone, but it will take time, and we do not have enough ships to carry everyone at once. The canary stood up suddenly, his massive form blocking out the light from the camp's lamps. When he spoke, his voice through the translator was different, stronger. The Vorthans will not harm these beings. Helen looked up at him with surprise. You want to fight them? But there are only a few security guards here, and most of the refugees cannot fight. I will fight them, the canary said simply. It is what I was born to do. Jake stood up too, feeling the familiar weight of his military training. If he fights, then I fight with him. Jake, you are not a soldier anymore, Helen protested. Your leg, your injuries. My leg is metal, but my brain still works, Jake interrupted. And I know how to plan battles. If the Vorthans are coming, we need to be ready. The canary looked down at Jake with something that might have been pride. Friend Jake will fight beside me? Always, Jake said without hesitation. That is what packmates do. The word packmates seemed to have special meaning for the canary. He made a sound that the translator could not convert, but Jake understood it anyway. It was a sound of acceptance and gratitude. Over the next few days, Jake and the canary worked together to prepare the camp's defenses. Jake used his military experience to identify the best positions for fighting, while the canary tested his strength against the camp's equipment. They discovered that the huge creature could move incredibly fast despite his size, and his claws could cut through metal like paper. But the most important discovery came when other refugees began volunteering to help. Zara, the crystal being, revealed that her people could create powerful energy weapons from their own bodies. Finn, the elderly scaled creature, turned out to be a former ship pilot who knew how to operate the camp's defense systems. "We will not run anymore," Zara said in her musical voice. "Hope taught us that some things are worth fighting for." Jake looked confused. "Hope taught you?" Dr. Chen smiled. "That is what they call him now. All of them. When they talk about the canary, they say Hope." Jake felt a warm feeling in his chest. The name had caught on naturally, spreading through the camp like the feeling itself. The giant creature that had once been called Last Standing was now known as Hope. That night, Hope and Jake sat together under the alien stars. The camp was quieter than usual as everyone prepared for what might come. But there was no panic, no desperation. Instead, there was determination. "Are you ready for this?" Jake asked his friend. Hope was quiet for a moment before answering. "For the first time since my pack died, I am ready to fight again. But now, I fight for a different reason." "What reason is that?" Hope looked around the camp at all the beings who trusted him to keep them safe. "Before, I fought because I was angry. Now I fight because I have something to protect again. I fight for hope." Jake nodded, understanding completely. "Then we will win, because hope is stronger than hate." The canary made that untranslatable sound again, but this time Jake thought it sounded like agreement. As they prepared for battle, both warrior and veteran knew they were no longer fighting alone. They had found their pack again, and they would protect it with everything they had. The giant dog that no one had wanted had become Hope, the guardian that everyone needed. And together with Jake, he was ready to show the galaxy what happened when broken souls found purpose again. The Vorthan ships appeared in the sky like dark clouds bringing a storm. Jake counted 12 of them through his binoculars, each one bigger than the entire refugee camp. His military training told him they were facing impossible odds, but his heart told him they had no choice but to try. Hope stood beside him on the camp's observation platform, his massive form perfectly still as he watched the enemy ships descend. The canary had changed over the past week as they prepared for battle. His movements were sharper, more focused. The gentle giant who played with children had become a warrior again, but a different kind of warrior than before. "Evacuation ships are ready," Helen reported over the radio. "But we can only take half the refugees in the first trip. The rest will have to wait for the second wave." Jake did the math in his head. It would take at least 6 hours for the ships to return. 6 hours that Hope and the volunteers would have to hold the camp against 12 Vorthan warships. "Then we make sure they get those 6 hours," Jake said into his radio. Danny Rodriguez, the former Navy pilot who led camp security, came running up to them. "The Vorthans are landing troops on the far side of the valley. Looks like they want to take prisoners, not just destroy everything." This was both good and bad news. Good because it meant the Vorthans would not simply bomb the camp from space. Bad because it meant they were planning something worse than death for the refugees. Hope made a deep rumbling sound and spoke through his translator. "Vorthans take prisoners to work in their mines. Slow death instead of quick death." Jake felt anger burn in his chest. He had seen the reports from other worlds the Vorthans had conquered. The stories of slave labor and experiments were horrible, beyond imagination. "Not happening," Jake said firmly. "Not to our people." The word "our" seemed to have an effect on Hope. The canary turned to look at Jake with those intelligent yellow eyes. "Our pack," he agreed. The evacuation began immediately. The youngest and oldest refugees were loaded onto the first ships while Jake, Hope, and their volunteers took positions around the camp. They had spent the week building barriers and setting up defensive positions, but Jake knew it would not be enough against professional soldiers. What they had was something else, though. They had refugees who had decided to fight back instead of run. Zara and her crystal people had formed sharp weapons from their own bodies. Finn and other former pilots had armed the camp's maintenance vehicles with improvised weapons. Even some of the older children had volunteered to help by carrying supplies and messages. "Remember the plan," Jake spoke into his radio to all the defenders. "We are not trying to win a war. We just need to slow them down long enough for our people to get away." The first Vorthan soldiers appeared at the edge of the valley just as the evacuation ships lifted off. They moved in perfect formation, their green and silver armor gleaming in the sunlight. These were professional conquerors who had destroyed dozens of worlds. Hope crouched low beside Jake's position, every muscle in his body ready for action. They move like hunters who have never been hunted. Then let us teach them something new, Jake replied, checking his rifle one last time. The Vorthans advanced slowly, probably expecting the refugees to surrender without a fight. When they were halfway across the valley, Jake gave the signal to begin. Zara and her people attacked first, their crystal weapons firing beams of pure energy that cut through Vorthon armor like it was paper. The enemy soldiers scattered in surprise, clearly not expecting organized resistance. Hope chose that moment to attack. The huge canary moved faster than anything that big should be able to move, covering the distance to the enemy lines in seconds. His claws tore through metal and his massive jaws caught soldiers who tried to run. But the most shocking thing was what happened next. As Hope fought, he began making sounds that Jake had never heard before. It was like howling, but deeper and more complex. The sound seemed to carry across impossible distances. "What is he doing?" Danny asked over the radio. Dr. Chen's voice crackled back through the communication system. "It is a pack call. He is calling for help." "Help from who?" Jake asked, even as he fired at advancing Vorthon troops. "His pack is dead." But then something amazing happened. Other sounds began answering Hope's call. They came from the sky, from space itself. The first ship to appear was small and fast, dropping out of hyperspace like a silver dart. Then came another, and another. The ships were from different species, different worlds, but they all responded to Hope's call with the same message broadcast on all frequencies. The pack endures. The pack protects. The pack remembers. Jake watched in amazement as the first ship landed behind the Vorthon lines. Warriors poured out of it, but these were not just any warriors. They were other Canary survivors, refugees from different camps who had heard Hope's call and come to fight. "Impossible," Jake breathed. "How did they get here so fast?" Hope paused in his battle to answer through the translator device still clipped to his armor. "Pack call travels faster than ships." Other packs heard. Other packs answered. More ships arrived every minute. Not just Canary, but other species that had fought alongside them in the past. Crystal warriors like Zara's people. Aquatic soldiers from the ocean worlds, even some human colonial marines. The largest ship to arrive bore the markings of the Free Colony's defense force. As it landed, its commander's voice boomed across the battlefield. "This is Colonel Amy Stewart of the Terran Colonial Marines. Any force threatening civilian refugees is now facing the combined might of the Free Species Alliance." Jake could hardly believe what he was seeing. Hope's call had somehow reached across multiple star systems and brought together an army of different species. But more than that, it had created something new. This was not just a collection of different armies. These warriors were fighting together like they had trained together for years. The Vorthans found themselves surrounded and outnumbered by an enemy they had never faced before. They were used to fighting individual species that hated and feared each other. They had never faced a united force of different peoples fighting as one pack. Hope stood in the center of the battlefield, no longer just a refugee or even just a warrior. He had become something like a general, directing the battle through sounds and movements that every species seemed to understand. When he howled, the Crystal Warriors knew to advance. When he roared, the Marines knew to take cover. Jake fought beside his friend with pride swelling in his chest. The giant creature that had been broken and nameless just weeks ago was now leading the largest interspecies military operation in galactic history. But the real miracle was not the size of the army that had come to help. It was the fact that they had come at all. Hope had somehow created bonds between species that had never trusted each other before. His call had not just summoned warriors, it had summoned a new kind of family. The Vorthon commander tried to retreat, but found his escape route blocked by ships from a dozen different worlds. As his forces surrendered or fled, he sent a message on all frequencies. "This is not over. The Empire will return with greater force." Hope's response was broadcast to every ship in the system, translated into every language. "Let them come. The pack will be waiting." As the battle ended and the evacuation ships returned to collect the remaining refugees, Jake sat down heavily next to his friend. His metal leg ached, and his human body was tired, but his spirit felt lighter than it had in years. "You did it," he told Hope. "You saved everyone." Hope looked around at the warriors from different worlds who were now working together to tend the wounded and clean up the battlefield. "We did it. The pack did it." Jake nodded, understanding that this was bigger than just one battle or one refugee camp. Hope had created something that could change the galaxy. He had proven that different species could work together, not just to survive, but to protect each other. The giant dog that no one had wanted had become the leader that everyone needed. News of the battle at Kepler 442b spread across the galaxy faster than the fastest ships. Within days, every refugee camp, every resistance cell, and every free world had heard the story of Hope and the pack that answered his call. More importantly, the story reached the Vorthan Empire itself. Jake sat in what used to be Helen's office, now serving as a military command center. Maps of the local star systems covered every wall, marked with red dots showing Vorthan positions and blue dots showing Allied forces. It was hard to believe that just a month ago this had been a simple refugee camp. Colonel Amy Stewart spread another map on the table between them. She was a tough woman, with gray hair and sharp eyes, who had been fighting the Vorthans for years. "Your friend has created something we never thought possible," she told Jake. "In 3 weeks we have received pledges of support from 47 different species." Hope lay beside Jake's chair, still massive, but somehow more relaxed than he had been during the battle. Dr. Chen had removed the translation device since Hope had learned to speak basic galactic standard well enough to communicate directly. "Not just my friend," Hope corrected the colonel in his deep, rumbling voice. "Our pack has grown large." Colonel Stewart nodded respectfully. Jake had noticed that even experienced military leaders treated Hope with unusual respect. There was something about the canary that inspired confidence and loyalty. "The problem is coordination," the colonel continued. "We have species that have been enemies for centuries now wanting to fight together. The Zephyrians and the aquatic Nereid have been at war for 200 years, but both want to join your alliance." Jake looked at Hope, wondering how his friend would handle this challenge. The canary was quiet for a moment, thinking. "Pack is not about species," Hope finally said. "Pack is about protecting what matters. Zephyrians and Nereid both lost homeworlds to Vorthans. They have same pain, same need for family." Dr. Chen, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up from her computer. "I have been studying the brain patterns of all the species that responded to Hope's call. There is something interesting happening." She turned her screen around to show them charts and graphs that Jake did not understand. When Hope makes his pack calls, it does not just communicate with Canary. The sound frequencies somehow trigger protective instincts in dozens of different species. It is like he is speaking a universal language of family and protection. Colonel Stewart leaned forward with interest. "Are you saying he can literally make enemies into allies?" "Not exactly," Dr. Chen replied. "He cannot change their minds, but he can help them remember what they are fighting for. Instead of fighting against their enemies, they start fighting for their families." This made sense to Jake. He had seen it happen in the refugee camp, where beings who had been afraid of each other started working together to protect the children and elderly. Hope stood up and walked to the window that looked out over the camp. In the weeks since the battle, it had grown into something like a small city. Temporary buildings had been replaced with permanent structures. Different species worked together on construction projects, with each group contributing their unique skills. "Pack grows stronger when everyone has purpose," and Hope said, watching a group of Zephyrian crystal singers teaching Nereid younglings how to make music. "Vorthans make beings feel helpless. We make beings feel needed." A communication alarm sounded, and Danny Rodriguez's voice came through the speakers. "Incoming message from the Vorthan command ship. They want to talk." Everyone in the room looked at each other with surprise. The Vorthans had never asked to talk before. They simply attacked, conquered, and moved on to the next target. "Put it through," Colonel Stewart ordered. The main screen lit up with the image. of a Vorthan commander. He was tall and thin with green-scaled skin and cold yellow eyes. When he spoke, his voice was like ice. I am Supreme Commander Vex of the Vorthan Empire. I wish to speak with the one called Hope. Hope walked slowly to where he could be seen by the camera. Even through the screen, Jake could feel the power that radiated from his friend. The Canary stood straight and proud, every inch a warrior and leader. I am Hope, he said simply. Commander Vex studied Hope for a long moment. You have caused significant disruption to our expansion plans. Your little alliance has cost us 3 star systems and delayed our schedule by months. Good, Hope replied without any emotion. The Vorthan's eyes narrowed. We offer you a choice. Surrender yourself to us and we will allow your followers to live as workers in our empire. Continue to resist, and we will destroy every world that has joined your alliance. Jake felt anger rising in his chest, but Hope remained perfectly calm. You do not understand what you are fighting. I am fighting a rabble of refugees and primitives led by an oversized animal, Commander Vex said with contempt. Hope's ears flattened against his head, and for a moment Jake saw the dangerous predator that lived beneath his friend's gentle nature. You are fighting something your kind has never faced before. You are fighting beings who choose to protect each other instead of themselves. Sentiment makes you weak, the Vorthan commander sneered. Then come and test our weakness, Hope challenged. Bring your strongest ships and your best soldiers, we will be waiting. Commander Vex's image disappeared, leaving the room in tense silence. Colonel Stewart was the first to speak. That was either very brave or very foolish. Hope turned back, to the window, watching his people working together below, perhaps both. But pack does not surrender family to save itself. Over the next few days, reports came in from across the galaxy. The Vorthan Empire was mobilizing its largest fleet ever assembled. Hundreds of warships were moving toward their sector, along with transport ships full of ground troops. But other reports were more encouraging. More species were joining the alliance every day. Ancient enemies were putting aside their differences to face the common threat. Refugee camps were transforming into military bases as civilians learned to fight alongside professional soldiers. Jake spent most of his time helping coordinate the alliance's defenses. His military experience was valuable in planning how different species could work together effectively. But the real leader was Hope, who seemed to have an instinctive understanding of how to motivate and organize beings from dozens of different worlds. One evening, as Jake was reviewing supply reports, Hope came to sit beside him. The Canary had been quieter than usual, and Jake could tell something was bothering him. What is it, big guy? Jake asked, setting down his paperwork. Hope was silent for a long time before answering. I think about my original pack often. They died protecting our homeworld, but they failed. The Vorthans won. Jake could hear the pain in his friend's voice. You did not fail them. I lived when they died, Hope said quietly. Sometimes I wonder if they would be proud of what I have become, or if they would think I abandoned our old ways. Jake thought about this carefully before responding. From what you have told me about Canary culture, your people valued loyalty and protection above everything else. Look around you. You have created the largest family in galactic history, and you are protecting them all. I think your original pack would be very proud. Hope made that untranslatable sound that Jake had learned meant deep emotion. Perhaps you are right, but soon I will face the greatest test. When the Vorthans come with their full strength, many of our new pack will die. Some might, Jake agreed honestly. But they are choosing to fight for something they believe in. That is not your fault. That is their honor. Hope nodded slowly. Then we will make their sacrifice meaningful. We will show the galaxy that hope is stronger than fear. As they sat together in the growing darkness, Jake realized that his friend had become something more than just a warrior or even a leader. Hope had become a symbol of everything good that different species could accomplish when they worked together. The giant dog that no one had wanted was now the most important being. In the galaxy, the Vorthon fleet arrived like a plague of metal locusts. blotting out the stars with their massive ships. Jake stood on the command platform watching through telescopes as hundreds of enemy vessels took positions around Kepler 442b. He had fought in many battles during his military career, but he had never seen anything like this. Final count is 437 warships, Colonel Stewart reported, her voice tight with concern, plus at least 100 transport ships full of ground troops. They brought everything they have. Hope sat calmly beside the command table, but Jake could see the tension in his friend's massive frame. The Canary was studying tactical displays that showed the positions of both fleets. Their own alliance had managed to gather ships from 63 different species, but they were still outnumbered 3-1. They want to end this quickly, Hope observed, his deep voice carrying across the busy command center. Show the galaxy what happens when beings resist the Empire. Dr. Chen looked up from her communication equipment. We are receiving surrender demands on all frequencies. Commander Vex wants you to turn yourself over within 6 hours, or they will begin orbital bombardment. Jake felt his jaw clench. And kill everyone in the camps below, including thousands of non-combatants. That is their way, Colonel Stewart said grimly. They do not care about civilian casualties. In fact, they prefer to make examples out of entire populations. Hope stood and walked to the window that looked down at the planet's surface. Below them, the refugee camp had grown into a small city where beings from dozens of worlds lived and worked together. Children played in the streets while their parents built new homes and started new lives. They will not harm our pack, Hope said with quiet determination. Hope, I admire your confidence. But the numbers, Colonel Stewart began. Numbers are not everything, Hope interrupted. Vorthons fight for conquest and glory. We fight for family. That makes us stronger. As if to prove his point, Hope began making the deep howling sound that had summoned help before. But this time was different. The call was longer, more complex, filled with harmonies that seemed to speak directly to the soul. Within minutes, responses began coming from every ship in the Alliance fleet. Not just from Canary, but from every species. The crystal beings sang in frequencies that made the air shimmer. The aquatic Nereid created sounds like crashing waves. Even the humans added their voices to the chorus. Jake felt tears in his eyes as he listened to the song of 63 different species singing together as one voice. It was the most beautiful and terrifying sound he had ever heard. What are they doing? Dr. Chen asked in wonder. Preparing for battle, Hope answered. This is how pack fights, not as separate beings, but as one family. The Vorthon response was swift and brutal. Commander Vex's voice boomed across all communication channels. Your time is up. Witness the price of defiance. The first wave of Vorthon ships dove toward the planet's surface, their weapons charging for bombardment. But they never reached their targets. The Alliance fleet moved like a living thing, each ship knowing exactly where it needed to be. Zephyrian crystal ships created walls of pure energy that absorbed the Vorthon attacks. Nereid vessels, filled with water, moved in flowing patterns that confused enemy targeting systems. Human ships used their advanced technology to coordinate attacks from multiple species at once. But the most amazing sight was Hope himself. The massive Canary had transferred to a specially modified ship that could carry his weight and project his voice across the entire fleet. As the battle raged, he continued his pack calls, and somehow every captain in the Alliance knew exactly what to do. Impossible, Colonel Stewart breathed as she watched the tactical display. They are fighting like they have trained together for years. Jake understood what was happening better than most. It is not about training. It is about trust. Every captain out there trusts Hope to lead them, and they trust each other to do their part. The battle raged for hours. Ships from both sides were destroyed in brilliant explosions that lit up the darkness of space. But gradually, the Alliance began to gain the advantage. The Vorthons had superior numbers and technology, but they had never faced an enemy that fought with such perfect coordination. Commander Vex finally demanded another communication link. His scaled face appeared on the screen, no longer cold and confident. Now he looked confused and angry. This is impossible, he snarled. You are primitives, refugees. How are you defeating the finest fleet in the Empire? Hope's image appeared, beside Jake's on the return transmission. The Canary looked calm and strong, even with the sounds of battle raging around his ship. You see weakness where we see strength, Hope told the Vorthan commander. You see many different species. We see one family. Sentiment and emotion make you weak, Commander Vex insisted, but his voice lacked the confidence it had held before. Then, why are you losing? Hope asked simply. For the first time in the conversation, the Vorthan commander had no answer. His ships were being destroyed by an enemy that should have been easy to defeat. His soldiers were being outfought by refugees and civilians who had learned to work together. The turning point came when a group of Vorthan ships tried to break through the Alliance lines to attack the planet directly. They were met by a mixed squadron led by Hope's ship, with Jake serving as tactical coordinator. Crystal ships create a barrier at coordinates 47 Alpha. Jake called out over the radio. Nereid squadrons flank them from below. Human ships target their engines. The attack was perfectly executed. The Vorthan ships found themselves trapped and overwhelmed by enemies who seemed to read each other's minds. Within minutes, the entire squadron had been destroyed or forced to surrender. How did you do that? One of the captured Vorthan pilots asked during his interrogation. We have the best ships, the best weapons, the best training. How are you beating us? Jake looked at Hope, who was resting nearby after the intense battle. His friend was tired but not defeated. If anything, the Canary looked more determined than ever. Because we fight for each other, Jake told the prisoner. You fight for your empire. We fight for our family. There is no contest. By the end of the third day, the Vorthan fleet was in full retreat. They had lost more than half their ships and gained nothing. Commander Vex sent one final message before fleeing with what remained of his forces. This is not over. The Empire has thousands of ships. We will return with a force you cannot possibly defeat. Hope's response was broadcast not just to the retreating Vorthans, but to the entire galaxy. We will be ready, and we will not be alone. As the enemy ships disappeared into hyperspace, Jake felt a mixture of relief and concern. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. The Vorthan Empire would indeed return with greater force. But as he looked around at the celebration happening on every ship in the Alliance fleet, Jake realized something important had changed. This was no longer just about defending one refugee, camp, or even one planet. Hope had created something that could challenge the Empire across the entire galaxy. Different species that had never trusted each other were now willing to die for each other. Ancient enemies had become family members. The giant dog that no one had wanted had somehow taught the galaxy a new way to live. The Vorthans could bring their thousands of ships. The Alliance would be waiting, and it would be stronger than ever. Because hope, once kindled, spreads faster than any fleet can travel. 6 months after the Great Battle, Kepler 442b had become the unofficial capital of what the galaxy now called the Free Species Alliance. The small refugee camp had grown into a major city with buildings designed by dozens of different species working together. Crystal spires from the Zephyrians reached toward the sky next to flowing Nereid water gardens and practical human structures. Jake walked through the busy streets with Hope beside him, marveling at how much had changed. Children from 20 different worlds played together in the parks. Market stalls sold food and goods from across the galaxy. Most importantly, beings who had once been enemies now worked side by side, building a new kind of civilization. Hard to believe this all started with you refusing to eat, Jake said to his massive friend. Hope made a sound that Jake had learned was canary laughter. Hard to believe it started with one human being kind to a broken warrior. They were heading to the new Alliance Council building, where representatives from 87 different species met every day to coordinate their growing resistance to the Vorthan Empire. What had started as a desperate defense of one refugee camp had become a galactic movement. Dr. Chen met them at the entrance to the building. She now served as the Alliance's head of communication, helping different species understand each other better. Her translation technology had improved dramatically with input from so many different cultures. The morning reports are encouraging, she told them as they walked to the main council chamber. 17 more worlds declared independence from the Empire this week. The Vorthans are having trouble maintaining control over their territories. This was the most surprising development of the past months. As news of the alliance spread, worlds that had been conquered by the Vorthans began rebelling. They had hope now that resistance was possible, that they did not have to accept slavery and oppression. Colonel Stewart was waiting for them in the council chamber. She now commanded all alliance military forces, coordinating fleets from dozens of different species. The walls around her were covered with maps showing Vorthan territory marked in red and alliance territory marked in blue. Jake was amazed to see how much blue there was now. Status report, Hope requested, taking his place at the head of the large circular table. Jake still found it remarkable how naturally his friend had taken to leadership. The other council members, representing species from across the galaxy, all looked to Hope for guidance and inspiration. The good news is that our fleet strength has doubled again, Colonel Stewart reported. We now have ships and crews from 91 different species. The not-so-good news is that the Vorthans are adapting to our tactics. She activated a holographic display showing recent battle footage. They have stopped sending large fleets that we can coordinate against. Instead, they are using small, fast strike forces to attack isolated worlds before help can arrive. Jake studied the tactical information with his military experience. Hit-and-run tactics. They are trying to make us spread our forces too thin to be effective. Exactly, Colonel Stewart agreed. And it is working. We cannot be everywhere at once. Hope was quiet for a long moment thinking about this problem. Jake could almost see his friend's mind working, processing information and looking for solutions. We need to change our approach, Hope finally said. Instead of trying to protect every world, we need to teach every world to protect itself. Dr. Chen looked interested. What do you mean? Hope stood and walked to the holographic display. With one massive paw, he pointed to several star systems that were under Vorthan control, but showing signs of rebellion. We send small teams to these worlds, not to fight their battles for them, but to teach them how to fight together. Show them what we have learned about different species working as one pack. Jake felt excitement building as he understood what Hope was suggesting. Create more alliances, turn the Empire's own conquered worlds against them. The Vorthans rule through fear and division, Hope continued. They keep different species on the same world from working together. But if we can show them how to cooperate, the Empire collapses from within. Colonel Stewart finished, her eyes bright with possibility. Over the next few weeks, they put Hope's plan into action. Small teams of Alliance volunteers traveled to worlds throughout Vorthan space, not to conquer or liberate, but to teach. Each team included members from several different species who could demonstrate the power of cooperation. Jake led one of these teams to a mining world called Zerion Prime. The planet was home to 3 different species that the Vorthans kept carefully separated to prevent rebellion. The rock-eating Duranian miners worked the deep tunnels, while the flying Etherian workers handled surface operations, and amphibious hydros managed the water processing facilities. They have been enemies for generations, the local resistance leader, a Duranian named Corks, explained to Jake's team. The Vorthans made sure of that by spreading lies about each group and giving them different privileges. Hope, who had insisted on joining this particular mission, studied the situation carefully. Fear and mistrust between species. Same tactic. Vorthans use everywhere. How do we overcome centuries of hatred? Asked Elena Vasquez, the human engineer on Jake's team. Hope's answer was simple, but profound. We show them what they have in common. It took weeks of patient work, but gradually the 3 species began to see past their differences. The Duranians learned that the Etherians were not lazy, but were actually overworked in dangerous conditions. The Etherians discovered that the Hydros were not plotting against them, but were struggling to purify increasingly poisoned water supplies. Most importantly, all 3 groups realized they shared the same suffering under Vorthan rule. Their children were taken away to serve the Empire. Their workers died in unsafe conditions, their cultures were being systematically destroyed. My daughter was taken to serve on a Vorthon warship, one Etherian mother told the mixed group during one of their secret meetings. I thought the Duranians did not care because they did not speak of their losses, but now I know they grieve in their own way. A Duranian father nodded sadly. We lose our young ones too. But we thought you, Skyflyers, were too proud to understand our pain. Hope watched these conversations with deep satisfaction. This is how Pack begins, not with friendship, but with understanding. The breakthrough came when Vorthon security forces raided one of the Hydro's communities, looking for resistance members. Without being asked, Duranians and Etherians risked their own safety to help hide their amphibious neighbors. Why did you help us? A young Hydros asked after the danger had passed. We have never been friends. An elderly Etherian woman smiled. Because we are all prisoners here, and prisoners must help each other if they want to be free. Within days, the three species were working together to plan their rebellion. They used each group's unique abilities to create a strategy the Vorthons never saw coming. Duranians collapsed key tunnels to cut off reinforcements. Etherians coordinated attacks from the air. Hydros contaminated the water supplies to Vorthon facilities. The rebellion succeeded beyond everyone's expectations. Not only did they drive the Vorthons off Zirian Prime, but news of their cooperation spread to neighboring systems. Other multi-species worlds began their own unified rebellions. You were right, Jake told Hope as they watched the celebration in Zirian Prime's main square. Duranians, Etherians, and Hydros were dancing together for the first time in living memory. Teaching them to work together was more effective than any military victory. Hope nodded, watching the mixed families, celebrating their freedom. Military victory takes territory. This victory changes hearts. Hearts are harder to conquer again. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy as Alliance teaching teams helped dozens of worlds discover the power of cooperation. The Vorthon Empire was not just losing territory now, it was losing the fear and division that had held it together. Back on Kepler 442b, Dr. Chen was documenting everything for future generations. We are witnessing the birth of a new form of galactic civilization, she told Jake and Hope during one of their evening meetings. One based on cooperation instead of conquest. Hope looked out the window at their thriving city, where beings from nearly 100 different worlds lived together in peace. It started with one human showing kindness to one broken canary. Now it grows beyond anything we imagined. Jake felt a deep sense of pride, not just in what they had accomplished, but in what they had become. The giant dog that no one had wanted had indeed found hope. But more than that, he had given hope to an entire galaxy, and that hope was spreading faster than any empire could stop it. 5 years had passed since Jake first sat down next to a broken canary in a refugee camp. Now he stood on the observation deck of the largest space station in the galaxy, watching ships from over 200 different species dock at the ports below. What had once been called Kepler 442b was now officially known as Hope Station, the capital of the Free Species Alliance. The transformation was incredible. The station stretched for hundreds of miles in all directions, with residential areas designed for every type of being imaginable. Crystal cities hung in anti-gravity fields for the Zephyrians. Vast water gardens provided homes for aquatic species. Human-style buildings mixed with architectural styles from across the galaxy. Hope stood beside Jake, no longer just a refugee or even just a leader. The massive canary now wore the ceremonial armor of the Pack Alpha, the highest position in Alliance, government. But to Jake, he was still the same friend who had shared his pain in the early days. Hard to believe how far we have come, Jake said, scratching behind Hope's ears the way he had done since their first day together. Hard to believe how far we still have to go, Hope replied in his deep, thoughtful voice. His galactic standard had improved greatly over the years, though he still preferred to speak in the simple, direct way that had made him such an effective leader. Dr. Chen approached them with her daily report. She now served as the Alliance's Director of Interspecies Relations, helping new member worlds integrate into their growing civilization. Her translation technology had become so advanced, that most species could communicate directly with each other. The morning reports are very positive, she said with a smile. 3 more former Vorthon worlds declared independence this week and requested alliance membership. That brings our total to 237 member species. The collapse of the Vorthon Empire had been surprisingly rapid once their subject worlds learned they could work together. The Empire had ruled through fear and division for centuries, but Hope's example had shown the galaxy a different way to live. Colonel Stewart joined them on the observation deck. She looked older now, with more gray in her hair, but her eyes were bright with satisfaction. Fleet reports indicate that the last Vorthon stronghold has fallen. Emperor Vex himself has fled to the dark regions beyond the galactic rim. Jake felt a mixture of triumph and sadness. The war was finally over, but it had cost so many lives. Still, the galaxy was a better place now. Billions of beings lived in freedom who had once been slaves. "What will you do now?" Jake asked Hope. "The Alliance will still need leadership, but the emergency is over." Hope was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the bustling station below. Children from dozens of different worlds played together in the parks. Market areas buzzed with trade between species that had never even known each other existed before. Most importantly, there was no fear, no suspicion between different groups. "I have been thinking about that," Hope said finally. "The Alliance has good leaders now. Colonel Stewart, Dr. Chen, many others who understand cooperation better than I do. Perhaps it is time for this old warrior to step back." Jake was surprised. "You want to retire?" "Not retire," Hope corrected. "Continue the mission that brought us together. There are still refugee camps throughout the galaxy, beings who have lost their families and their hope. Perhaps I can help them the way you helped me." The idea made perfect sense to Jake. Hope had always been at his best when he was helping individuals, showing them how to find strength in cooperation and family. "I would like to come with you," Jake said, "if you will have an old soldier with a metal leg." Hope's deep rumble of approval filled the air. "Always, packmate, always." Dr. Chen looked emotional as she listened to their conversation. "You know, what you have created here will last, do not you? This is not just a government or an alliance, this is a new way for different species to live together." She was right. Across the galaxy, former enemies had become friends and allies. Ancient prejudices had been replaced by understanding and cooperation. Children grew up learning about dozens of different cultures and considering them all part of their extended family. "It started with kindness," Hope said, looking at Jake with those intelligent yellow eyes. "One human being kind to one broken canary. Kindness spreads like ripples in water." Elena Vasquez, now serving as the Alliance's chief engineer, approached their group. She had been part of Jake's team on several missions and had become like family to both of them. "The new refugee assistance ships are ready," she reported. 6 vessels equipped with medical facilities, translation equipment, and everything needed to help displaced populations. Each ship has mixed crews from different species. This was Hope's new project. Instead of waiting for crises to develop, the Alliance would actively seek out beings who needed help. They would go to the remote areas of the galaxy where refugees and outcasts gathered, offering not just aid, but the chance to become part of something larger. "The first ship is ready for departure," Elena continued. "The crew is excited to begin the mission." Hope nodded approvingly. "Good. But first, there is something I want to do." He led them through the station to a special section that few beings ever visited. Here, in a place of honor, stood a simple memorial wall. On it were inscribed the names of every being who had died fighting for the Alliance, from that first battle on Kepler 442b to the final victory over the Empire. But at the center of the wall was a smaller plaque that simply read, "To those who were lost before hope was found. Your sacrifice gave meaning to our survival." Hope stood before this memorial in silence for several minutes. Jake knew he was thinking about his original pack, the Canary warriors who had died defending their homeworld so long ago. "They would be proud," Jake said quietly. "I hope so," Hope replied. "I hope they understand that their deaths were not in vain, that their sacrifice helped create something beautiful." As they prepared to depart for their first refugee assistance mission, Jake reflected on the incredible journey they had shared. A broken veteran and a traumatized warrior had found healing in each other's friendship. That friendship had grown into something that changed the entire galaxy. The refugee ship New Hope was sleek and fast, designed to reach crisis areas quickly. Its crew included beings from 12 different species, all trained in both medical aid and cultural sensitivity. They would go to the dark corners of the galaxy where suffering still existed, bringing not just help, but the promise that no one had to face their pain alone. Hope took his place on the bridge, looking comfortable, in his role as mission commander. Jake served as his second-in-command, their partnership as strong as ever. Together they would continue the work that had brought them together, showing lost souls that there was always reason to hope. Their first destination was a small asteroid, where survivors of a recent plague had been abandoned by their own government. As the ship approached, Jake could see the fear and desperation in the refugees' eyes through the view screen. "Remember," Hope told his crew as they prepared to make contact, "we do not come as saviors. We come as family members offering to share what we have learned about working together." The rescue operation was smooth and efficient. Within hours, the refugees were aboard the ship, receiving medical care and learning about the Alliance. Most importantly, they were learning that they were not alone anymore. "How did you know we were here?" one of the refugees asked Hope as they shared a meal in the ship's dining area. Hope's answer was simple and profound. "Because Pack looks out for Pack. No one gets left behind." Jake watched his friend interact with the refugees and felt the same wonder he had experienced in that first refugee camp so long ago. Hope had a gift for making broken beings feel whole again, for showing them that their suffering had not been meaningless. As their ship moved through space toward its next mission, Jake thought about how their story would be remembered. History would probably focus on the great battles and political changes. But Jake knew the real story was simpler and more powerful. It was the story of a giant dog that no one wanted who found hope when a wounded veteran gave him a name. It was the story of two broken souls who healed each other and then helped heal a galaxy. Most importantly, it was a story that continued every day, as beings throughout the galaxy chose cooperation over conflict, understanding over prejudice, and hope over despair. The giant dog that no one had wanted had become the leader that everyone needed. But more than that, he had become the friend that showed the galaxy what family really meant. And that legacy would last forever, spreading from world to world like ripples in an endless ocean of stars. Pack endures, Pack protects, Pack remembers, and Pack never leaves anyone behind.